The wind in the Texas Panhandle did not just blow. It hunted. It sought out the gaps in buttoned coats and the cracks in window frames, carrying the bite of winter straight from the Rockies down to the flat, unforgiving scrub of the plains. It was 1874, a year that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the peace, the treaties or the people. Clara Whitmore stood beside her small, leather-bound trunk, watching the stagecoach that had brought her here disappear into a cloud of red dust and gray grit. The driver had not even tipped his hat. He had simply pointed a gloved finger at the wooden sign swinging on a leaning post, shouted that this was the place, and cracked his whip over the team of 4 tired horses. She shivered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. She was 22 years old, and she had never felt silence this loud. In St. Louis, the air was always thick with the sound of carriage wheels, street vendors, and church bells. Here, the silence was vast, punctuated only by that hunting wind and the dry rattle of sagebrush tumbling across the hard earth. She looked at the sign. The wood was weathered, the paint peeling, but it hung there with a stubborn permanence. It did not look like the prosperous cattle ranch described in the letters. It looked like a scar on the land. Clara touched the pocket of her dress, feeling the crinkle of the letter inside. It was her lifeline. It was the promise of a husband named Arthur, a man she had never met but who had written with a steady hand about a white house, a growing herd of cattle, and a need for a woman's touch. It was the promise that had convinced her father, a pastor with more prayers than pennies, to send her away to save the family from the crushing weight of debt. "Just be a good wife, Clara," her father had said, his eyes wet. "The West is a new country. You can build a life there." Clara took a breath. The air smelled of dry grass and something sharper, perhaps the scent of snow coming on the edge of the storm. She picked up her trunk. It was heavy, filled with the few dresses she owned, a Bible, and a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother. She walked toward the main building, a low structure made of rough-hewn logs and mud, with a porch that sagged like a tired man's shoulders. She stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under her boots. She raised her hand and knocked on the heavy oak door. There was no answer for a long moment. Then, the sound of a heavy latch lifting. The door swung open, but it was not Arthur who stood there. It was a woman. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with hair the color of iron wire pulled back into a severe knot. Her face was a map of deep lines etched by sun and worry, and she wore a man's heavy canvas coat over a simple calico dress. In her hands, she held a broom, but she held it across her body like a rifle. "We are closed for the season," the woman said. Her voice was flat, devoid of welcome. "No fresh horses until the supply wagon comes next week." Clara blinked, her rehearsal speech dying on her lips. I beg your pardon? The stagecoach driver knows better than to drop folks off here when the larder is empty," the woman continued, looking past Clara at the empty road. "If you are looking for whiskey, we are out. If you are looking for a bed, the straw is old." "No," Clara said, finding her voice. "I am not looking for whiskey. I am looking for my husband." The woman's eyes narrowed. They were a pale, piercing blue, sharp as chipped flint. "Husband. There is no husband here. Girl. Just me and the wind. And neither of us is looking to get married." Clara fumbled in her pocket and pulled out the letter. Her hands were trembling, partly from the cold, mostly from a rising tide of panic. "But—" "The directions. This is the crossing at Red River Station. Is it not Mr. Arthur Vance? He sent it to me. He sent the ticket." The woman looked at the letter but did not take it. She looked at Clara, really looked at her. From the hem of her dust-stained skirt to the top of her sensible bonnet, a flicker of something crossed the woman's face, not quite pity, but a weary recognition. "You are at the crossing. Right enough," the woman said. "But there is no Arthur Vance here. Never has been." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "You best come in before you freeze to death. That wind will strip the skin off a buffalo." Clara stepped across the threshold, and the door shut behind her. cutting off the howl of the wind. The silence inside was different. It was heavy, smelling of wood smoke, old grease, and damp wool. The main room was dim, lit only by the embers in a stone hearth that took up half the far wall. It was not the parlor of a prosperous rancher. It was a working room, cluttered and stark. A long table scarred by knife marks stood in the center. Behind a rough counter were shelves holding meager supplies, tins of beans, a few boxes of ammunition, and a jar of dried tobacco. "I am Mrs. Delaney," the woman said, leaning the broom against the wall. "I ran this way to the station. I keep the mail when the riders come through, and I feed the fools who travel this road when they should be home by the fire." Clara stood in the middle of the room, still clutching her trunk handle. "I do not understand. The letter said—" "Let me see it. Mrs. Delaney said." She took the envelope from Clara's hand. Her fingers were rough, the knuckles swollen. She squinted at the handwriting in the dim light. She did not read the words so much as inspect the paper itself. "Silas?" she muttered. "Who?" Clara asked. "Mrs." Delaney handed the letter back. "Silas Crow. I would know that script anywhere. Fancy loops, like a snake coiling back on itself." She walked over to the hearth and stirred the coals with an iron poker. "He is a broker, or so he calls himself. A Comanchero who trades in whatever makes a profit. Sometimes it is cattle. Sometimes it is whiskey." She looked over her shoulder at Clara. "Sometimes it is brides." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "You mean, he tricked me. He likely sold the promise of you to some drover or prospector down near the Brazos." "Mrs." Delaney said matter-of-factly. "He sends the girls here, to the drop-off. Usually. He is here to collect them. Strange he is not." "He is not here?" Clara asked, her voice sounding very small in the large, dim room. "No, and lucky for you, he is not." "Mrs." Delaney said. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "If Silas Crow was here, you would already be in a wagon heading south, and you would not be sitting in the front seat." Clara gripped her trunk. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. She was 1,000 miles from St. Louis. She had $7 in her coin purse. She had no husband, no home, and the man who had brought her here was apparently a criminal. "Sit, Mrs." Delaney commanded, pointing to a sturdy wooden chair by the fire. "You look like you are about to faint, and I am too old to drag you across the floor." Clara sat. The heat from the fire began to thaw her numbed fingers, but it could not touch the cold knot in her stomach. She looked around the room, trying to anchor herself. Above the mantelpiece hung a black and white photograph in a simple wooden frame. It was a portrait of a man with a thick mustache and kind eyes, staring stiffly at the camera. A black ribbon was draped over the corner of the frame. Beside the hearth, hanging from a peg, was a saddle. It was well oiled but covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it had not been used in a long time. And then she saw the boots. They were small, made of soft leather, standing neatly by the back door. A child's boots. But the house was silent. There were no toys scattered on the floor, no small coats on the hooks. The boots sat there like a monument, clean and waiting. Is there a child here?" Clara asked softly. "Mrs." Delaney stiffened. She was pouring coffee from a battered tin pot into a ceramic mug. "My granddaughter, Nina, is she sleeping?" "She is hiding," Mrs. Delaney said. She set the mug down in front of Clara with a clatter. "She does not talk to strangers. Not anymore." Clara wrapped her hands around the mug. The coffee was bitter and thick, but it was hot. "I am sorry to intrude. Mrs. Delaney, truly, I will find a way to leave in the morning." "You will not go anywhere in the morning," Mrs. Delaney said, moving to the window and peering out through a crack in the shutters. "The storm is turning. The air smells like ice. And besides, there is no stage back east for 3 days." Clara followed the woman's gaze. Through the dirty glass, she could see the gray expanse of the yard. The wind was whipping up dust devils that danced like ghosts across the ground. Beyond the fence line, Near the edge of the scrub brush, a figure stood. It was a man. He was motionless, ignoring the biting wind that tore at his clothes. He wore buckskins that blended with the color of the dried earth, and his hair was long and black, moving like a dark banner in the gale. He was not looking at the house. He was looking at the ground. "Who is that?" Clara whispered. "Mrs." Delaney glanced at her, then back at the man. "That is Tyen. Is he waiting for something?" "He is reading, Mrs." Delaney said. "Reading." Clara looked closer. The man was not holding a book. He was staring at the ruts in the road, at the churned earth where the stagecoach had turned around. "He reads the ground better than you read your Bible." "Girl." "Mrs." Delaney said, her voice dropping a fraction. "He is Comanche, or was. Now he is, well, he is between things." Clara watched him. Tyen moved then, a slow, fluid motion. He crouched, touching the earth with his fingertips. He did not look like the terrifying savages she had read about in the penny dreadfuls back in St. Louis. He looked solitary. He looked like a part of the landscape that had suddenly decided to take human form. He did not come closer to the fence. He stayed on the outside, respecting a boundary that was invisible but clearly understood. "Is he dangerous?" Clara asked. "Mrs." Delaney snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Everything out here is dangerous. Miss Whitmore, the weather, the rattlesnakes, the men. Tyen. He brings me venison when the winter is hard. He translates when the traders come through who speak tongues I do not know. He is useful, and he owes a debt to my son." She glanced briefly at the photograph on the mantel. Clara looked back at the window, but the man was gone. He had vanished into the gray twilight as if he had dissolved into the wind. "Drink your coffee, Mrs." Delaney said. "I will find you some blankets. You can sleep on the bench by the fire. It is the warmest spot." The evening dragged on, heavy and slow. Clara ate a bowl of stew that tasted mostly of salt and pepper, swallowing it down past the lump in her throat. "Mrs." Delaney moved about the kitchen with efficient, angry movements, scrubbing pots that were already clean, rearranging tins on the shelves. "Silas Crow." "Mrs." Delaney said suddenly, breaking a long silence. She was wiping down the counter, her back to Clara. "He brings many girls this way. They come with letters, just like you. Dresses too nice for the dust. They stay a night, maybe two, then a wagon comes, or a rider, and they are gone." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. "Where do they go, Mrs.?" Delaney turned. Her face was grim, lit from below by the dying fire. "West, south, to the mining camps, to the forts, places where men have money and no wives." She paused, her eyes searching Clara's face. "You were lucky the sign was switched. The wind likely turned it on the nail. If the driver had taken you 5 miles further down the creek to where Crow usually meets the wagon, you would not be drinking my coffee right now." Clara set the mug down, her hand trembling again. "I have to go back. I have to go home." "Home is a long way off, Mrs." Delaney said, "and looking at that trunk of yours, and those soft hands, I would wager there is not much for you to go back to." It was a cruel truth, but a truth nonetheless. If Clara went back, she went back to her father's shame, to the debts that would take the parsonage, to the whispers of the neighbors about the girl who was sent away and came back rejected. "Gia Din," Clara thought, remembering a line from a sermon her father had given once, though now it twisted in her mind with a new, bitter meaning. "Family is not where you are sent. It is where you choose to stay." But she had not chosen this. She had been discarded here. Night fell completely, draping the prairie in a heavy, suffocating blackness. The wind howled around the corners of the cabin, sounding like a chorus of mourning women, somewhere in the distance. A wolf answered the wind, a long, lonely sound that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. "Mrs." Delaney extinguished the oil lamp. Plunging the room into shadows danced by the firelight. "Sleep," she said. "We rise at 5 o'clock. The cow needs milking, even if the world is ending." Clara lay down on the hard wooden bench, pulling the scratchy wool blankets up to her chin. She used her coat as a pillow. The logs of the wall were rough against her back. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the image of her bedroom in St. Louis, the floral wallpaper, the smell of lavender sachets. But the image was faint, overlaid by the smell of wood smoke and the endless howling wind. She told herself she would leave tomorrow. She would walk if she had to. She would flag down the first wagon heading east. She would not be a victim of Silas Crow or a burden to this hard woman. She was drifting into a fitful sleep when she felt a tug. It was gentle, barely a touch. Clara opened her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Standing beside the bench was a small figure in a white nightgown. It was the child, Nina. She was no more than 7 years old, with dark, tangled hair and eyes that were huge and solemn in the gloom. She held a rag doll with one limp arm. She did not speak. She simply stared at Clara, her gaze intense and searching. Clara slowly withdrew her hand from under the blanket. "Hello," she whispered. Nina did not answer. She reached out with her free hand and grasped a fold of Clara's blanket. She held it tight, her knuckles white. It was the grip of someone who was terrified of letting go. It was the grip of a child who had seen people leave and never return. "It is all right," Clara whispered, though she knew it was a lie. "I am here." Nina nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. She did not smile. She just stood there, anchoring Clara to the wooden bench, to the drafty room, to the desolate ranch in the middle of the Texas Panhandle. Outside, the wolf howled again. Closer this time. The wind battered the door, rattling the latch, demanding entry. But the door held. Clara looked at the child's hand on the blanket. She looked at the boots by the door. She thought of the Comanche man standing in the cold, reading the earth, and she thought of the empty road back to St. Louis. She did not pull the blanket away. She lay still, listening to the storm build, while the little girl held on to her as if she were the only solid thing left in the world. Tomorrow, Clara thought, she would figure out how to survive. Tonight, she would just stay. The morning arrived not with the warmth of the sun, but with a gray, steel-colored light that did nothing to chase away the bone-deep chill of the high plains. The wind had died down to a low whistle, but the air remained sharp enough to freeze the breath in one's throat. Clara Whitmore woke before the rest of the house stirred. She lay for a moment on the hard wooden bench, staring at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, the smell of old wood smoke and stale coffee filling her nose. Her back ached from the unforgiving wood, and her stomach rumbled with a hunger she was too polite to mention the night before. But stronger than the hunger was a desperate, clawing need to be useful. She could not just be the girl who was sent to the wrong address. She could not be the unwanted parcel left on a stranger's doorstep, quietly, so as not to wake Mrs. Delaney or the silent child. Nina. Clara slipped out from under the scratchy wool blankets. She smoothed her dress, a wrinkled blue calico that looked woefully out of place against the mud-chinked walls, and pulled on her boots. She found a heavy tin bucket by the back door and stepped out into the biting dawn. The barn was a short walk across the frozen yard. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the scent of hay, manure, and the sweet, heavy smell of the animals. A single milk cow, a large Jersey with a coat like dusty velvet, stood in the corner, chewing cud with a rhythmic, indifferent jaw movement. "Good morning," Clara whispered to the beast. She tried to sound confident. She had read about farming in books. She knew the theory of it. One sat, one pulled, and milk arrived. It seemed simple enough. She positioned a 3-legged stool near the cow's flank and sat down. The animal shifted, its massive weight causing the straw to crunch. Clara placed the cold tin bucket underneath the udder. She took a deep breath, reached out, and grasped 2 of the teats. They were warm and soft, a texture that made her flinch slightly. She pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled harder, yanking down. The cow let out a low, unhappy sound and sidestepped. "Please," Clara hissed, frustration rising. "I need to do this." She tried again, gripping tighter, her fingernails digging in inadvertently. She pulled with a jerky, desperate motion. The reaction was instantaneous. The cow kicked out, a swift, brutal motion of a hoof that struck the tin bucket with the sound of a gunshot. The bucket flew across the barn, clattering against the wooden stall. Clara, startled, lost her balance on the stool and tumbled backward into the straw, her skirts tangling around her legs. From the hayloft above! A sudden gasp echoed. Clara looked up to see Nina peering down, her eyes wide with terror. The noise had frightened the child, and the cow was now stomping nervously, tossing its horned head. "It is all right," Clara cried out, trying to scramble to her feet, but her boots slipped on the loose straw. I am sorry." The cow swung its hindquarters, pinning Clara against the wooden partition. Panic flared in her chest. The sheer size of the animal was overwhelming up close. She was trapped, the heavy flank pressing the air from her lungs. Then, the barn door slid open. There was no sound of footsteps, no hurried rush. One moment Clara was alone with her panic, and the next, Tyen was there. He moved differently than the men back in St. Louis. He did not march, he flowed. He wore a heavy coat made of buffalo hide. The fur turned inward, and his presence seemed to suck the chaotic energy right out of the room. He approached the nervous cow not with fear, but with a low, humming sound in his throat, a vibration that seemed to calm the animal instantly. He placed a hand on the cow's hip and murmured a word in a language Clara did not know. The beast exhaled a long breath and stepped away, releasing Clara. Clara slumped against the wood, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She brushed the straw from her hair, her face burning with humiliation. I was only trying to help." Tyen did not speak immediately. He picked up the battered bucket, inspected it for dents, and set it back upright beneath the cow. Then he turned his dark eyes toward her. Up close, his face was striking sharp cheekbones and skin weathered by the wind. But his eyes were not hard. They were observant. He gestured to the stool. "Sit." It was a command, but spoken softly. Clara hesitated, then sat. She reached for the udders again, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She was going to fail again. She was going to be useless again. Tyen stepped closer. He moved in behind her, his body shielding her from the draft of the door. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smelling of wood smoke, sage, and oiled leather. It was an overwhelming, masculine scent that made her breath hitch. "Not pull," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "Squeeze." He reached down. He did not shove her hands aside. Instead, he placed his large, rough hands over hers. His skin was dark against her pale fingers, scarred with thin white lines of old cuts. The contact was shocking electric and grounding all at once. "Like this," he whispered. He guided her fingers. He showed her the rhythm, a rolling motion, closing the thumb and forefinger at the top to trap the milk, then squeezing down with the rest of the fingers. It was not a yank. It was a wave of pressure. Swish. A stream of warm, white milk hit the bottom of the bucket. Swish, swish. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. She could feel his chest rise and fall against her back. His hands were strong, calloused, yet incredibly gentle as they manipulated hers. He was controlling the motion, but he was letting her feel the success of it. "Slow," he murmured, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair by her ear. "The animal feels your fear. You must be water, not stone." The rhythm established itself. The milk frothed in the pail. The intimacy of the moment was intense, far more scandalous than anything she had ever experienced in the parlors of St. Louis. Yet it felt completely necessary. He was not touching her to take. He was touching her to give. He leaned in closer, his chin grazing her shoulder. For a second, the rest of the world, the debts, the lies, the cold fell away. "I will teach you everything," he whispered. The promise hung in the air, heavy and ambiguous. It sounded like a vow. Before Clara could find the breath to answer, the spell was shattered. From the yard outside came the thunder of hooves. Not one horse, but many. Men were shouting, their voices rough and loud, tearing through the morning silence. A dog barked frantically. Tyen's hands vanished from hers instantly. The warmth at her back was gone. He was already at the barn door, peering through a crack in the wood, his posture shifting from gentle instructor to tense predator. Clara stood up, her legs trembling. "Who is it?" "Bad men," Tyan said. "Stay here." But Clara could not stay. She moved to the door and looked out over his shoulder. In the yard, near the watering trough, 5 riders had reined in their horses. They were hard-looking men, covered in the dust of the trail. Their coats were long canvas dusters, and they wore pistols low on their hips. The leader rode a tall bay gelding. He was a thick-set man with a beard that hid half his face and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He sat in his saddle with the arrogance of someone who was used to taking what he wanted. "Mrs." Delaney had come out onto the porch, clutching her broom, looking small but defiant against the riders. "We are closed, Mrs." Delaney shouted. "I told the stage driver, and I'm telling you." The leader laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "We are not here for oats, old woman. We are here for the package." Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "I have no packages." "Mrs." Delaney said. "Do not play games." The man spat, leaning over his saddle horn. "Silas Crow sent us. Said a girl was dropped here yesterday by mistake. A Miss Whitmore. We have the bill of sale right here." He tapped his breast pocket. "Paid in full. We are here to collect." Clara gasped. Bill of sale. As if she were a heifer or a crate of rifles. Beside her, Tyan went very still. He was not looking at the men's faces. He was looking at their horses. "Look," Tyan whispered to himself, though Clara heard him. "What?" she breathed. "The horses," he said, his voice tight. "Look at the feet." Clara looked but saw only hooves stamping in the frozen mud. But Tyan saw more. He saw the way the horses were shod a distinctive, clumsy style of shoeing that left the nail heads protruding slightly, a method used by a specific blacksmith in the settlement south of the river. More importantly, he saw the bridles. One of the horses, a roan with a white star, had a bridle made of braided horsehair with a specific turquoise bead pattern. "That is a Comanche bridle," Tyan said, a dangerous edge entering his voice. "Stolen." "What does it mean?" Clara asked. "It means these men steal stock, then leave Comanche arrows to blame my people." Tyan said, "They make war so they can sell the peace." In the yard, the tension was snapping. The leader of the riders drew a heavy revolver and rested it on his thigh. "I will give you the count of 3, woman. Send the girl out, or we burn this shack down with you in it." "Mrs." Delaney hesitated. She looked toward the barn, her eyes filled with conflict. Clara knew she could not hide. If she stayed in the shadows, these men would hurt Mrs. Delaney. She pushed past Tyan before he could stop her and stepped out into the freezing wind. "I am here," Clara said. Her voice shook, but she held her chin high. The leader turned his horse toward her, a grin spreading through his beard. "Well now," Silas did not lie. "You are a pretty thing, even if you do look a bit skinny for the winter." "I am not going with you," Clara said. "I am not a package." The man chuckled. "You are what the paper says you are, darling. And the paper says you belong to a miner in El Paso who paid $300 for a wife. Now get your bag. There is a problem." "Gentlemen," the voice came from the road. Deputy Hale rode up on a tired gray mare. He was a man who seemed to be perpetually shrinking inside his own clothes. His badge was polished, but his eyes were shifting and nervous. "Deputy, Mrs." Delaney called out. "These men are threatening me. They want to take this girl against her will." Deputy Hale looked at the riders, then at Clara, then at the ground. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. Despite the cold, "Now, boys, let us not have trouble." "No trouble, Sheriff," the leader said. "Just commerce. We have a contract." Hale looked at Clara. "Miss, do you have a husband here?" "No, but do you have family here?" "No." "Then," Hale said, sighing as if the weight of the world was on his narrow shoulders, "it is a civil matter. If Mr. Crow has the paperwork, the law says you have to go. Best just go along. Miss, don't make a fuss. The town does not need a feud with Silas Crow." Clara stared at him, horror dawning. The law was not here to protect her. The law was here to keep things quiet. "He is right," the leader said, holstering his gun. "Come on, girl. We have a wagon waiting down the ridge. You will like El Paso. It is warm there." Clara looked at the men, their leering faces, the cruelty etched into their posture. She looked at Mrs. Delaney, who was gripping her broom until her knuckles were white but saying nothing. She looked at the open expanse of the prairie, which suddenly felt like a prison. Character against society. The society said she was property. The society said she should go quietly to avoid inconveniencing the peace. If I go, Clara thought, I would die. Maybe not today, but the Clara who exists inside me will die. She stepped back. "No!" The leader's face hardened. He spurred his horse forward, the animal's chest knocking Clara backward into the mud. "I am done asking." He reached down to grab her arm. A stone whizzed through the air. It struck the leader's horse square on the nose. The horse reared, screaming, and the man had to grab the saddle horn to keep from being thrown. Tyan stepped out of the barn. He held nothing but a coil of rope, but he looked like a thunderstorm contained in skin. "She says no," Tyan said. His English was accented, harsh and guttural compared to his soft whispers earlier. The leader wrestled his horse back under control, his hand dropping to his gun again. "An Indian, you are letting a savage tell white men what to do. Hale." Deputy Hale looked terrified. "Tyan, stay out of this. This is not your business. She is under my protection." Tyan lied. He did not look at Clara. He kept his eyes on the rider's hands. The leader spat tobacco juice onto the snow. "Protection, you have no rights here. Redskin, I will shoot you where you stand and get a bounty for it." "You have 5 men," Tyan said calmly. "I have the high ground, and I am not alone." He whistled. From the ridge behind the barn, where there was nothing but rocks and scrub, a coyote howled. Then another. It was a trick, Clara realized. He was mimicking the signals of a hunting party. The riders looked around nervously. They knew the stories. They knew that for every Comanche you saw, there were 3 you did not. "This is not worth the bullets," one of the men muttered to the leader. "We can come back when he's gone. Get her on the road." The leader glared at Tyan, his eyes full of hate. "We will be back, girl. And you." He pointed at Tyan. "I will take your scalp for a saddle decoration." He wheeled his horse around. "Let us go." The riders thundered off, disappearing over the rise. Deputy Hale watched them go, then looked at Clara with a mix of shame and relief. "You have made a mistake. Miss Silas Crow does not forget." He turned his horse and rode away without another word. Clara stood in the mud, her dress ruined, her heart pounding. Mrs. Delaney slumped against the porch rail, looking suddenly very old. Tyan did not celebrate. He turned to Clara, his face grim. "Pack your things." "What?" Clara asked. "They will be back before sunset," Tyan said, "with more men, and they will burn this place to get you." "Where can I go?" Clara cried. "There is nowhere." "There is the canyon," Tyan said. He pointed north, toward the jagged line of red rocks that marked the edge of the safe lands. "I can take you through the goat paths. The horses cannot follow there. We can get to the military outpost at Fort Griffin. It is a 3 days' ride." Clara looked at the forbidding landscape. "Go with you into the wild. I do not know you." "You know I did not sell you," Tyan said harshly. "And you know they did." Clara looked at Mrs. Delaney. "Go," the older woman said, her voice cracking. "He is right. If you stay, you are lost. And if you stay, they will kill us all to get to you." It was the hardest choice of Clara's life, to leave the fragile safety of a roof for the unknown terrors of the wilderness. Guided by a man her culture told her was a monster, but she remembered his hands on hers in the barn. "I will teach you everything." She ran to the house. She did not take the trunk. She took only her satchel, stuffing it with dried beef, a canteen, and her mother's hairbrush. When she came back out, Tyan was mounted on a paint horse that had appeared from behind the corral. He held a hand down to her. Clara took it. He swung her up behind him. The horse moved under their combined weight. The wind had picked up again. carrying snowflakes that stung like needles. Clara looked back at the house. The door cracked open. Standing there was Nina. The little girl was not hiding this time. She stood on the threshold, clutching her rag doll. Her eyes were wet, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. She did not wave. She simply watched, her gaze locking onto Clara's. It was a look of profound betrayal, and yet profound understanding. It was the look of a child who was used to people leaving, but who had hoped, just for one night, that this one might stay. "I will come back," Clara whispered, though the wind snatched the words away before they could reach the porch. "I promise." Tyen kicked the horse into a trot. They headed north, away from the road, away from the law, and into the teeth of the storm. Clara wrapped her arms around Tyen's waist, pressing her face into the rough fur of his coat. As the snow began to erase the world behind them, the storm that swallowed them was not merely weather. It was a living, breathing beast of the Texas Panhandle. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a high, thin sound that vibrated in the marrow of Clara Whitmore's bones. The snow came not in soft flakes, but in hard, driving pellets of ice that scoured any exposed skin raw. For the first few hours, Clara did nothing but hold on. She wrapped her arms around Tyen's waist, burying her face into the coarse, pungent buffalo hair of his coat. The horse, a sturdy paint with legs like iron pillars, trudged through the deepening drifts, head low, chest heaving against the gale. Clara had thought she knew it was cold in St. Louis. She remembered skating on frozen ponds, her cheeks pink, her breath plumbing in the air. That was a polite cold. This was a savage, indifferent violence. It numbed her fingers inside her gloves until they felt like wooden pegs. It crept up her legs, turning her blood to slush. Tyen did not speak. He was a solid wall against the wind, his body moving in rhythm with the horse. Every now and then, he would shift, leaning forward to pat the horse's neck or guide it away from a hidden ravine that Clara could not even see through the whiteout. By the time the gray light of day began to fail, surrendering to a bruised purple twilight, the horse was stumbling. "We stop," Tyen said. His voice was hoarse, torn away by the wind almost as soon as he spoke. He slid off the horse and reached up for her. When Clara tried to dismount, her legs refused to hold her. She collapsed into his arms, a bundle of wool and frozen limbs. He caught her easily, but there was no softness in his grip. He set her on her feet and held her shoulders until she steadied herself. "Walk," he commanded. "Move the blood." They had found shelter in the lee of a crumbling, abandoned dugout, a sod house built into the side of a low hill, likely by some hopeful settler who had long since given up or died. The roof had partially caved in, but 3 walls stood, offering a reprieve from the biting wind. Inside, the air was still and smelled of damp earth and decay. Tyen worked with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. He cleared a space in the corner, stripping dry bark from a dead cottonwood tree nearby and using flint and steel to spark a fire. When the first yellow tongue of flame licked at the wood, Clara let out a sob she had been holding back for miles. She scrambled toward the heat, peeling off her gloves with clumsy hands. Tyen did not sit. He went back out into the storm to tend to the horse. When he returned, he carried his saddlebags and a handful of snow, which he packed into a small tin pot to melt over the fire. He sat opposite her, the firelight dancing across his face. He looked exhausted. There was a long, jagged tear in the sleeve of his buffalo coat, and dark blood had stiffened the fur around it. "You are hurt," Clara said, her voice cracking from disuse. Tyen glanced at his arm. "Barbed wire, hidden in the snow. The fences are moving west faster than the people." "Let me see." Clara moved before she thought, her instinct to tend overriding her fear. Tyen watched her, his eyes unreadable, but he did not pull away. He shrugged off the heavy coat, revealing a buckskin shirt beneath. The sleeve was soaked with blood. "I need to clean it," Clara said. She looked around the dismal shack. I have a petticoat. It is cotton. I can tear it for bandages." She turned her back to him for modesty, though in this frozen hell, Modesty seemed a ridiculous luxury. She tore a strip from her underlayer, then used the melted snow water to wash the wound. It was a nasty gash, long but not deep. Tyen did not flinch as she dabbed at the raw flesh. He watched her hands. "You have a light touch," he said. "For a woman who cannot milk a cow." Clara flushed, but a small, weary smile touched her lips. "I am learning." The cow was uncooperative. The cow was frightened. Tyen corrected. "Like you." He took a needle and a spool of sinew thread from his pouch. He handed them to her. "Sew the coat. The skin will heal itself, but the coat will not." Clara took the heavy needle. The buffalo hide was tough, requiring force to puncture, but she fell into the rhythm of it. In St. Louis, she had embroidered handkerchiefs for church bazaars. Here, she was mending the only thing standing between a man and death by freezing. "Why?" she asked softly, keeping her eyes on her work. "Why did you help me? You could have ridden away. You owe Mrs. Delaney, perhaps, but you owe me nothing." Tyen poked at the fire with a stick. "Silas Crow," he said, the name coming out like a curse. "He is not just a broker of women. He is a broker of war." Clara looked up. "I do not understand." "My people," Tyen began, his voice low and rhythmic. "We are being pushed. The soldiers come from the forts. They say we steal cattle. They say we burn ranches. So they attack our winter camps. They kill the ponies. They burn the lodges." He looked at Clara, his eyes hard and bright. "But it is not us." "It is men like Silas. They steal the cattle. They shoe their horses with bad iron to leave strange tracks. They use arrows they bought from traders to mark the kills. They start the fire, and then they sell the water to put it out." Clara stopped sewing. "He frames you to keep the army here. The army buys beef." Tyen said simply. "The army buys whiskey. The army buys horses. If there is peace, the army leaves. Silas Crow needs the war. He needs the Comanche to be the monster." He leaned back against the dirt wall. "I help you because you are evidence. You are the only thing that does not fit his story today." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was not just a victim of a marriage scam. She was a pawn in a bloody game of economics. "So you are not a knight in shining armor," she said, finishing the stitch and biting the thread. "You are a scout looking for a trail." "There are no knights here." "Clara," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded strange on his tongue, heavier, more grounded. "Only survivors. And the dead." The next morning, the storm broke. The sky was a brilliant, blinding blue, the sun reflecting off the snow with a glare that made the eyes ache. "We move," Tyen said at dawn. He did not let her stand idle while he worked. "Watch," he said. He showed her how to saddle the horse, how to check the cinch, how to warm the bit in her hands before putting it in the horse's mouth so the cold metal would not tear the animal's skin. "Tighten it," he ordered. "If the saddle slips, you die." Clara pulled the leather strap with both hands, grunting with effort. "Harder," Tyen said. He did not help her. She pulled until her arms shook, bracing her boot against the horse's side. Finally, the buckle clicked into place. "Good," he said. They rode double again, but the snow was drifting, making travel slow. By midday, the sun had melted enough of the powder to reveal the scarred earth beneath. They were crossing a dry wash when Tyen pulled the horse up sharply. "What is it?" Clara asked. He pointed. Half buried in a snowdrift near a cluster of mesquite bushes was a blackened skeleton of wood and iron. It was a wagon, or it had been. Fire had consumed most of it, leaving only the charred ribs and the iron rims of the wheels. Tyen dismounted and walked toward it. Clara followed, stepping carefully in his footprints. "One of Silas's supply wagons," Tyen said, kicking at a blackened plank. "Burned to hide what was inside. Why would he burn his own goods? Because they were not goods he wanted to find." Tyen crouched down, sifting through the ash. He pulled out a piece of metal, a melted brass casing. "Springfield rifle cartridges, Army issue. He sells them to whoever pays. Comancheros, renegades." Clara wandered to the other side of the wreckage. The snow had preserved some things that the fire had missed. Caught in a tangle of thorny brush was a scrap of heavy canvas, likely part of the wagon cover that had blown free. She pulled it loose. Stamped on the canvas in faded black ink was a seal. It was a simple circle with a star in the center, and the words, Red River Station, Post 4. "Tyen," she called out. He came to her side. She held up the canvas. "Mrs. Delaney Station," Clara whispered. "This wagon came from her post." Tyen's jaw tightened. "She keeps the logs. She records every wagon that stops, every crate that is loaded. She knows. She knows he is a traitor," Clara said, the realization settling like a stone in her gut. "That is why she was so afraid. That is why she keeps the account books locked. And that is why he will kill her if he thinks she talks," Tyen said. They rode on, the silence between them heavier now. The landscape was vast and empty, a sea of brown and white. Clara was learning to read it, or at least to see it through Tyen's eyes. She watched how he scanned the horizon, never looking at one spot for long. She learned to sip water from the canteen only when he did, holding the liquid in her mouth to wet her throat before swallowing, making a mouthful last an hour. By late afternoon, they reached a small depression in the earth where a thin line of smoke rose from a hidden chimney. It was a dugout, inhabited by a man Tyen seemed to know. A short, weathered man stepped out, holding a rifle. He had dark skin and a mustache that drooped past his chin. When he saw Tyen, he lowered the gun and smiled, revealing a gap in his front teeth. "Mateo," Tyen greeted him, sliding from the horse. "Tyen," the man replied. He looked at Clara with mild curiosity, but no judgment. "You bring a bird to the desert." "She is not a bird," Tyen said. "She is a guest." Mateo was a vaquero, a Mexican cowboy who had ridden these plains since before they had a name on an American map. He welcomed them into his small, smoky home, offering them beans and stale tortillas. "You seek news of the snake," Mateo said, after Tyen had spoken to him in a mix of Spanish and Comanche. "Silas," Tyen said. Mateo spat into the fire. "He passed away 3 days ago. 2 wagons, heavy, the wheels cut deep." "What was he carrying?" Clara asked. "Whiskey," Mateo said. "And lead, lots of lead. He buys from the east. He sells to the west. He tells the soldiers the Comanche are raiding, so the soldiers buy more bullets. He tells the Comanche the soldiers are coming, so they trade hides for rifles. He is feeding the fire from both sides," Clara said, anger rising in her chest. Tyen sat by the door, sharpening his knife. "He does not care who burns, as long as he can sift the gold from the ashes." Mateo looked at Tyen sadly. "The army is moving, hermano." "Mackenzie, Miles, they are coming from all sides. They want to finish it this winter. They will not distinguish between the free bands and the agency Indians." Tyen stopped sharpening his knife. He looked at the blade, the metal gleaming in the firelight. "I was an Indian agent once," he said quietly. "For 1 year." Clara turned to him. "You lived on the reservation." "I lived in a cage," Tyen said. "They took my horse. They told me to plow the earth. They said, 'Cut your hair, speak English, pray to our Jesus, and we will give you flour.' But the flour was full of weevils, and the beef was rotten." He looked up at Clara. "I followed their law. I did what the white father in Washington asked, and my brother died of a coughing sickness in a tent with no fire, waiting for blankets that never came." The room was silent. Clara felt a pang of shame for her own people, for the government she had always been taught was righteous. "So I left," Tyen said. "I took a horse and I left. I would rather die in the snow than live in their cage." Clara looked at this man, this savage she had been warned about, and saw a dignity that most of the men in St. Louis lacked. He was not wild. He was free, and that freedom had cost him everything. That night, Mateo slept in the back of the dugout, snoring softly. Clara lay on a pile of buffalo robes, but sleep would not come. Tyen was awake, sitting by the dying embers, his silhouette stark against the glow. Clara sat up and moved to sit beside him. The heat from the stones was fading. "Tyen," she whispered. He did not look at her. Go to sleep. We cannot go to Fort Griffin, she said. He turned his head slowly. It is the only safe place for you. Is it? She challenged me. If we go there, what happens I tell them about Silas? They ask for proof. I have none. I am just a hysterical woman. And you, they will arrest you. Or shoot you. Tyann remained silent, but she saw the muscle in his jaw jump. And even if they believe me, Clara continued, Silas will just disappear. He will burn the books, hide the money, and start again somewhere else. And Mrs. Delaney, he will kill her to silence her. What are you saying? Tyann asked. I am saying I trust you, Clara said. She reached out, her hand hovering near his arm, near the place she had mended. I trust you to lead, but you have to trust me to think. Tyann looked at her hand, then at her face. His expression was cold, a shutter slamming down. Trust is a word for people who sleep in warm beds. Clara, out here, trust gets you a knife in the back. Who betrayed you? She asked softly. Besides the government. It does not matter, he said, standing up abruptly. We rode to the fort at dawn. No. Clara stood too, facing him. She was small compared to him, but she did not back down. We go back. Tyann stared at her. Back. To the station, Clara said firmly. Mrs. Delaney has the ledger. Mateo said Silas buys and sells. The proof is in that book. The names, the dates, the amounts. That is what he fears. Not a gun, but the truth written down in black and white. It is suicide, Tyann said. He will be watching. He will be watching the road to the fort, Clara argued. He will not expect the sheep to come back to the wolf's den. Tyann looked at her for a long time. The firelight caught the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. She was no longer the frightened girl who had spilled the milk. The wind and the cold had stripped away the softness, revealing something harder underneath. You are foolish, Tyann said, but the edge was gone from his voice. I am practical, Clara countered. I have $7 and a trunk full of useless dresses. I have nowhere to go. If I run, I am nothing. If I fight, maybe I can be someone. Tyann looked toward the door, toward the vast, dark night where the wind still prowled. He thought of the horses with the stolen shoes, of the burnt wagon, of his brother coughing in the reservation tent. He looked back at Clara. The ledger, he said thoughtfully. If we get it, we can hang him with his own ink. Yes, Clara said. It will be dangerous. Tyann warned. If we are caught, there is no trial, just a bullet. Then you had better teach me how to shoot, Clara said. Tyann's mouth twitched, a shadow of a smile. First, you learn to ride without falling off. Then, we talk about guns. He kicked dirt over the fire, extinguishing the light. Sleep now. We turn south in the morning. Clara lay back down. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was fuel. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, she did not dream of home. She dreamed of a ledger book and a way to rewrite her own story. Outside, the wind shifted, blowing from the north, pushing them back toward the danger, back toward the truth. Returning to Red River Station felt less like coming home and more like stepping voluntarily into a bear trap. The wind had scrubbed the sky clean of clouds, leaving a vast, pale blue dome that offered no cover. The station sat exposed on the flat plain, a singular dark mole on the face of the earth. They had separated a mile out. It was Tyann's design. If we ride in together, they shoot, he had said, his voice flat and practical. If you walk in alone, looking like a dog that has been kicked, they will pause. Curiosity is stronger than the trigger finger. So Clara Whitmore walked the last mile. She let her shoulders slump. She allowed the dust to coat her face and the exhaustion to drag at her steps. It was not difficult acting. Her legs were leaden, and her stomach was a hollow pit of anxiety. When she reached the porch, Mrs. Delaney was there, chopping wood with a ferocity that suggested she was imagining each log was a man's neck. The older woman paused. the axe hovering in midair, her jaw dropping as she recognized the figure stumbling toward her. Lord have mercy. Mrs. Delaney breathed, lowering the axe. You came back. I thought you had the sense God gave a goose, but I see I was wrong. I had nowhere else to go, Clara said, her voice raspy. And I got a cold. Mrs. Delaney scanned the horizon, her eyes sharp. And the Indian tie-in, gone, Clara lied, though her heart hammered against her ribs at the falsehood. He left me at the canyon edge, said I was too slow. Mrs. Delaney looked at her for a long, searching moment. She spat to the side, a gesture more suited to a saloon than a front porch. Well, get inside, before someone sees you and decides to finish what they started. The interior of the station was just as dim and smelling of stale grease as before. But now the shadows seemed to have teeth. Clara sat at the rough table while Mrs. Delaney poured coffee that was black as tar. You are a fool, girl, Mrs. Delaney said, slamming the mug down. Silas Crow will hear you are back before the sun hits the meridian. The wind carries gossip faster than a telegraph wire out here. Let him hear, Clara said, wrapping her hands around the mug to stop them from shaking. I want him to hear. Mrs. Delaney froze. What game are you playing? You are not holding a full deck. I know about the ledger, Clara said softly. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Delaney turned slowly, her face draining of color. She looked at the door, then back at Clara. Who told you that? It does not matter, Clara said. I know you keep the records. I know Silas is moving army ammunition. I know he is framing the Comanche to keep the soldiers here, so he can sell to both sides. Mrs. Delaney sank into the chair opposite Clara. She looked suddenly frail, the iron in her spine melting away. It is not just ammunition, she whispered. It is everything. Horses, beef, women. Show me, Clara said. Mrs. Delaney hesitated, her hand going to the locket at her throat. If I show you, I am dead. If Silas knows I kept it. If you do not show me, he wins, Clara said. He keeps selling girls like cattle. He keeps burning wagons. And eventually, when you are no longer useful, do you think he will let you retire in peace? The older woman closed her eyes. She knew the truth of it. Men like Silas Crow did not leave loose ends. Mrs. Delaney stood up and went to the hearth. She knelt on the stone flags, prying up a loose stone near the woodpile with the handle of a spoon. Beneath it was a hollow space wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. She placed it on the table. It was heavy. Clara opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting dates, inventory lists, prices. Here, Mrs. Delaney pointed with a trembling finger. November 3rd, 5 crates of Springfield cartridges, delivered to S.E., payment received in gold. And here, Clara pointed to a column marked only with initials. J.H. $20, monthly. Mrs. Delaney's face twisted in bitterness. James Hale. The deputy, Clara asked, though she had suspected it. He owes Silas more than $800 from gambling at the saloons in Fort Griffin. Mrs. Delaney said. Silas owns him. Hale does not look the other way because he is lazy. He looks the other way because if he does not, Silas calls the debt, and Hale hangs for corruption. Clara felt a wave of nausea. The law was bought. The safety she had sought was an illusion. So we have no one, she said. We have the truth, Mrs. Delaney said, touching the book. But the truth is only good if you can get it to a judge who is not on the payroll. And the nearest federal marshal is in Austin. We do not need to go to Austin, Clara said, her mind racing back to the plans she and Tyan had whispered about in the dark. We bring the judge here. What judge? The army, Clara said. Tyan said Colonel Mackenzie is moving his column toward the river. The army hates Comancheros almost as much as they hate the Indians. If they catch Silas selling their own bullets back to the enemy, they will hang him from the nearest cottonwood. Mrs. Delaney finished. But how do you get Silas and the army in the same place? I am the bait, Clara said. Before Mrs. Delaney could object, a small sound came from the doorway leading to the back room. Nina stood there. The little girl was clutching something in her hand. She walked over to the table, her eyes fixed on Clara. She did not look frightened anymore. She looked determined. She reached out and placed an object on top of the open ledger. It was a ribbon, a satin hair ribbon, once bright yellow, now stained with mud and dried rain. "Sarah," Nina whispered. Clara looked at the child. "Who is Sarah?" "The lady," Nina said, her voice small and brittle. "Before you," she cried. "Mrs." Delaney let out a long, shuddering breath. 2 months ago, a girl from Ohio. Silas came for her in the night. It was raining hard. Nina was in the loft. I did not know she saw." Nina looked at Clara, her dark eyes fierce. "He took her. She dropped this." Clara picked up the ribbon. It was cheap satin, the kind a girl would wear to a Sunday social. It was a tangible piece of a life destroyed. It was not a number in a book. It was a person. "He will not take anyone else," Clara promised, closing her fingers around the ribbon. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere in the station shifted. A group of drovers stopped for water, eyeing Clara with open suspicion. The town, if the collection of shacks nearby could be called that, was buzzing. Clara could feel the hostility radiating from the men. To them, she was the city girl who had brought trouble, the one who had defied the natural order of things. She slipped away to the barn under the pretense of checking the cow. The barn was dim, dusty, and smelled of dry hay and old leather. Clara walked to the center of the room, her heart beating fast. "Tyen," she whispered. There was no answer, just the rustle of mice in the straw. She moved toward the ladder leading to the loft. "I know you are here." A shadow detached itself from the gloom of the upper rafters. Tyen dropped silently to the floor, landing with the grace of a cat. He brushed straw from his buckskin shirt. "You should not be seen talking to the air," he said quietly. "I am talking to my partner," Clara said. She moved closer to him. The space between them felt charged, electric. Outside, the wind rattled the loose boards, emphasizing the isolation of their sanctuary. "Did you get the book?" Tyen asked. "Yeah, it is damning. Hale is on the payroll, and Nina, she has proof of the last girl." Tyen nodded grimly. "Good. Then the trap is set." Clara looked at him. He seemed part of the shadows, wild and dangerous. Yet he was the only thing in this world that made her feel safe. She took a step closer, breaking the propriety she had been raised to uphold. "I'm afraid," she admitted. Her voice trembled. Tyen looked down at her. His face softened, the hard lines around his eyes relaxing. He reached out, not to grab, but to touch. His hand, warm and rough, slid around the back of her neck, his thumb resting against the pulse point of her throat. "Fear is good," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "Fear keeps you sharp. Only the dead are not afraid." "What if he does not come?" Clara whispered. "What if he just sends his men to kill us?" "He is a businessman," Tyen said. He stepped closer, until the buttons of his shirt grazed her dress. "He is greedy. You are $300 walking. He will come to collect before he destroys." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her face. It was an intimacy that went beyond the physical. It was a sharing of air, of risk. "I cannot promise you safety." "Clara," he whispered, his use of her name sending a shiver down her spine. "I cannot promise the sun will rise tomorrow without blood." "Then what do you promise?" she asked, her hands rising to rest on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. "I promise I will not leave you," Tyen said. "I will be the shadow at your back. I will be the knife in the dark. I will not leave you until the end." It was not a vow of romance. It was a vow of war. And in that moment, it was better than any poetry. Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. For a moment, they just stood there, two outcasts in a barn at the edge of the world, finding an anchor in each other. "Tyen," she breathed. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "The time for soft words is later. Now, you must learn the hard ones." He reached into his belt and pulled out a heavy revolver. It was a Colt Army model, the metal dark and oily. He held it out to her. Handle first. Clara stared at it. It looked heavy. It looked lethal. Take it, Tyen ordered. Clara reached out and took the gun. Her wrist dipped under the weight. It smelled of sulfur and grease. This is not a toy, Tyen said, his voice shifting into the instructional tone he had used with the cow. It is a machine. It does not care who it kills. You must tell it. He guided her hands, showing her how to hold it with 2 hands to steady the aim. Here is the latch, he said, flipping the loading gate open. You put the cartridge in. Turn the cylinder. Put the next one in. Clara's fingers fumbled with the brass cartridges. They were cold and slick. She dropped one in the straw. Pick it up, Tyen said. That is life. Do not waste it. She picked it up and slid it into the chamber. Click. She turned the cylinder. Click. When you shoot, Tyen said, standing behind her, his arms encompassing hers to adjust her aim. You do not pull the trigger. You squeeze. Like the milking. If you pull, you miss. If you squeeze, you hit. Clara sighted down the barrel at a knothole in the wall. She felt the power of the weapon, the cold reality of what it was intended to do. She was a pastor's daughter. She was supposed to be baking bread and mending socks. But the pastor's daughter was gone. In her place was a woman standing in a barn with a Comanche warrior, holding a piece of iron that could end a life. I can do this, she said. You must, Tyen said. Suddenly, the barn door creaked. Tyen vanished into the shadows of the horse stall so fast it was as if he had teleported. Mrs. Delaney poked her head in. Rider coming, she hissed. One of Silas's boys. He is carrying a white flag. Clara lowered the gun, hiding it in the folds of her skirt. She looked toward the stall where Tyen was hiding. She could not see him, but she knew he was there. I am coming, Clara said. She walked out into the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red. A man on a horse sat by the gate. He was young, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel set of his mouth. Miss Whitmore, the man said, tipping his hat mockingly. Mister, Crow was surprised to hear you returned. He thought you had wandered off. I realized I made a mistake, Clara said, keeping her voice steady. I have no money. I have no prospects. I am ready to honor the agreement. The man grinned. Smart girl, mister. Crow is a forgiving man. He will meet you tomorrow at noon. Blind Man's Creek. Bring your trunk. And the money? Clara asked. The letter said my husband paid for me. If there is no husband, I want the money. The man laughed. You have spirit. I like that. We will see what Mr. Crow says. Noon. Do not be late. He wheeled his horse and galloped off. Clara watched him go. She felt Mrs. Delaney beside her. Blind Man's Creek. Mrs. Delaney said. That is 5 miles south. It is a box canyon. No way out. Perfect, Clara said. Perfect for a trap. Mrs. Delaney warned. Yes, Clara said, touching the heavy weight of the Colt in her pocket. But he thinks he is the one setting it. That night, the station was a hive of quiet activity. Mrs. Delaney sat at the table, forging a letter. It was addressed to Colonel Mackenzie, detailing the location of a Comanchero meeting and the promise of illegal arms sales. Mateo will take this to the Army Patrol, Tyen said, stepping out from the back room. He knows where they camp. Will they come in time? Clara asked. If they smell powder and glory, they will ride their horses to death to get there. Tyen said. He looked at Clara. She was cleaning the gun, her movements slow but deliberate. Tomorrow, Tyen said. Silas dies. Or we do, Clara replied, not looking up. Or we do. Tyen agreed. He sat across from her, watching the firelight play on her face. She looked tired, her skin pale, dark circles under her eyes, but she also looked fierce. The virgin who had arrived with a trunk full of dreams was gone. The woman sitting across from him was forged in the fire of the Panhandle. Clara, he said softly. She looked up. You learned fast, he said. I had a good teacher, she replied. There was no more need for words. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. But inside, the resolve was as solid as the iron in Clara's hand. They were ready. The sheep was going to lead the wolf to the slaughter. The only question was who would be left standing when the smoke cleared. Clara checked the cylinder one last time. 6 rounds, 6 chances. She snapped the gun shut. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Let us finish this, she said. The wind at Blind Man's Creek was not the freezing gale that had assaulted them days before. It was a hot, dry breath that tasted of copper and ancient dust. The creek itself was a misnomer, merely a jagged scar in the earth where water might have run 1,000 years ago, now filled with tumbleweeds and rattlesnakes. The walls of the ravine rose up 10 feet on either side, red rock baked brittle by the sun, creating a natural amphitheater for a tragedy. Clara Whitmore stood in the center of the dry wash. The sun was high, beating down on her bonnet, but she felt a cold sweat trickling down her spine. She had placed her trunk at her feet, a ridiculous, civilized prop in this savage theater. Inside her pocket, the heavy Colt revolver dragged at her skirt. She was the bait, a lamb tethered for the wolf. He is late. Mrs. Delaney whispered from her position behind a cluster of boulders near the canyon entrance. The older woman lay flat on her stomach, a buffalo rifle resting on a rock. Beside her were 2 of the drovers who had been at the station, men who worked for wages but had agreed to fight for the sake of a child's lost ribbon. He will come, Clara said, not turning her head. Greed is punctual. High above, on the rim of the canyon, there was no movement, but Clara knew Tyen was there. He had blended into the landscape, a shadow among shadows. She drew strength from the knowledge of his presence, imagining his dark eyes watching the road, his steady hands checking the wind. Then, the sound came the crunch of iron-rimmed wheels on stone. A wagon rolled into the mouth of the creek, flanked by 4 riders. It was a heavy freight wagon, canvas covered, the wood stained dark. On the driver's bench sat a man with a shotgun. Beside the wagon rode Silas Crow. He was a man who looked like he had been constructed out of spare parts from a funeral parlor. He wore a black suit dusted with the trail, a silk vest that strained against a paunch, and a hat that cost more than most cowboys earned in a year. His face was pale and doughy, with eyes that were too small for his head. He reined in his horse 10 yards from Clara. He looked at her, then at the trunk, then around the empty canyon. He smiled, a wet, unpleasant reshaping of his face. Miss Whitmore, Silas said. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. You look much worse for wear than the description I was given, but nothing a bath and a new dress in El Paso cannot fix. I am not going to El Paso, Clara said. Her voice shook, but she forced volume into it. I want to negotiate, Silas laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He snapped it open with a flick of his wrist. Negotiate, he sneered. I do not negotiate with inventory. This is a bill of sale. My dear, signed by your father in St. Louis. It transfers guardianship of one Clara Whitmore, age 22, unblemished, to the bearer of this note for the sum of $300 to cover family debts. He waved the paper like a flag. You are not a person here. Clara, you are a heifer. You are a crate of rifles. You have $300 of meat that I have already paid for, and I am here to collect my property. Clara felt a flash of pure, white-hot rage. It burned away the fear. I am no man's property. You are what the paper says you are, Silas said, folding the document. Now, get in the wagon. I have a buyer waiting who is very impatient. Does the buyer know you steal the horses you sell him? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It echoed off the canyon walls. Silas's horse danced nervously. The riders pulled their guns, spinning in their saddles, looking for the source. Who is there? Silas shouted. Tyen stepped out from behind a slab of sandstone halfway up the canyon wall. He stood in plain sight, a rifle cradled in his arm. He looked magnificent and terrifying, a figure carved from the red rock itself. I am the witness, Tayan said. Silas squinted. The Indian? I should have known. You are the one who has been causing me trouble. You cause your own trouble. Silas, Tayan called down. You shoe your horses with nails that stick out. You leave arrows that you bought from the trader in Santa Fe. You burn wagons to hide the army bullets you sell to the bands that refuse peace. You are speaking nonsense, Silas spat, though his eyes darted nervously to his men. I speak what is written, Tayan said. Mrs. Delaney has the book, the ledger, dates, names. The gold you took from the army to feed the soldiers, and the gold you took from the Comanches to kill them. Silas went very still. The mention of the ledger struck him harder than a bullet. That old hag, he muttered. Then he raised his voice. There is no ledger, and who would believe a savage and a senile woman over a businessman? The colonel will believe, Tayan said. When he sees the bridles on your horses. Silas's face turned a mottled red. Kill him, he screamed at his men. Kill the Indian and grab the girl. Wait! A rider galloped into the canyon from the rear. Dust plumbing behind him. It was Deputy Hale. His horse was foaming, his eyes wild. Sheriff, Silas yelled. Do your job. This savage is threatening a citizen. Hale pulled his horse up, his chest heaving. He looked at Silas, then up at Tayan, then at Clara. He looked like a man standing on a gallows trap door. The patrol is coming, Hale gasped. 5 miles out. I saw the dust. Then finish this. Silas roared. Get rid of them, all of them, if they talk. Hale, you hang next to me. Hale looked at Clara. There was no apology in his eyes, only a desperate, terrified self-preservation. He raised his revolver, not at Tayan, but at Clara. It was the coward's choice. Eliminate the easiest witness first. I am sorry, Miss, Hale said. Bang. The shot did not come from Hale. It came from Mrs. Delaney's buffalo rifle. Hale's hat flew off his head as the heavy slug slammed into his shoulder, knocking him clean out of the saddle. That is for the gambling debts, Mrs. Delaney shouted from the rocks. The canyon exploded. Silas's men opened fire on Mrs. Delaney's position. The drovers returned fire. Bullets whined off the canyon walls, sending sprays of red stone splinters into the air. The horses screamed, rearing and plunging in the confined space. Clara threw herself behind her trunk as the dirt around her erupted in small geysers of dust. The air filled instantly with the acrid stench of black powder smoke. High above, Tayan was moving. He did not stay in one place. He fired, levered his rifle, ran along the rim, and fired again. One of Silas's riders toppled backward. His foot caught in the stirrup as his horse bolted. Silas did not fight. He scrambled off his horse and ran toward the back of his wagon. He yanked the canvas flaps open. Come here, you little brat, Silas screamed. He dragged a small figure out of the wagon bed. It was Nina. Clara's heart stopped. They had grabbed her. They must have circled the station and taken her while Mrs. Delaney was setting the ambush. Silas hauled the child up, holding her in front of him like a shield. He pressed the barrel of his revolver against her temple. Nina was kicking and screaming, her small boots finding no purchase. Stop, Silas bellowed. Stop firing or I paint the rocks with her brains. The shooting faltered. Silence crashed back into the canyon, heavy and ringing. Throw down the guns, Silas yelled, backing toward the canyon wall, keeping Nina tight against his chest. You, Indian, drop it or she dies. Tayan stood on the rim, his rifle raised. He had a shot, but it was impossible. Silas was using the girl's head to cover his own. Tayan slowly lowered the barrel. Come down here, Silas commanded. And you, Clara, stand up. Clara rose from behind the trunk. Her hands were empty, held out to her sides. The coat was still in her pocket, heavy and hidden in the folds of her dress. Let her go. Silas, Clara said, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and fury. She is a child. She is leveraged. Silas snarled. He was sweating profusely now, his eyes darting between Clara and the rim where Tayan stood. Hale, get up, you useless fool. Hale was groaning in the dirt, clutching his shattered shoulder. He was out of the fight. You have lost Silas, Clara said, taking a step forward. "The patrol is coming. You cannot kill us all." "I can kill enough of you to make a getaway," Silas hissed. "Now, Clara, kick that trunk over to me. I want to see if you have any money in it." He shifted the gun slightly, just an inch. As he gestured toward the trunk, it was the mistake Tyen had been waiting for. But he was too far. He could not reach them before Silas pulled the trigger. But Clara was close. She remembered the barn, the cold morning, the smell of the cow. Squeeze. Do not pull. Be water, not stone. In one fluid motion. Clara reached into her pocket. She did not aim for his head. Her hand was shaking too much for that. She aimed for the center of the mass that was threatening the child. She aimed for the weapon. She brought the Colt up with 2 hands, just as Tyen had taught her. Silas saw the movement. His eyes widened. He swung the gun away from Nina toward Clara. Squeeze! The Colt kicked in her hand like a living thing. A mule's kick that jarred her shoulder socket. The boom was deafening. Silas screamed. His right hand, the one holding the revolver, disintegrated in a spray of red mist and bone fragments. His gun went flying, spinning away into the dust. He dropped Nina, clutching his ruined wrist, doubling over in agony. "My hand, you witch, you shot my hand!" Nina scrambled away, crawling on hands and knees toward the rocks. "Tyen!" Clara screamed, but Silas was not done. With a roar of animal pain, he reached into his coat with his left hand. He pulled a derringer, a small, nasty hideout gun. He raised it, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. He was not aiming at Clara. He was aiming at the retreating back of the child. "No!" Clara tried to cock the heavy hammer of the Colt for a second shot, but her thumb slipped on the sweat-slick metal. A shadow fell from the sky. Tyen had leaped from the lower ledge of the canyon wall. It was a drop of 12 feet. He landed between Silas and Nina just as the derringer cracked. The sound was small, like a dry branch snapping, compared to the roar of the Colt. Tyen jerked. He stumbled back a step. A grunt of air forced from his lungs, but he did not fall. He lunged forward, his knife flashing in the sunlight. He did not stab. He slammed the pommel of the heavy knife into Silas's temple. Silas Crow collapsed like a sack of wet grain. He lay still in the dust, his blood pooling dark and thick on the red stones. The silence that followed was total. Then, the sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them. The army patrol swept into the canyon mouth, blue uniforms dusty, sabers rattling. At the head of the column rode a grim-faced lieutenant and Mateo. The vaquero. Soldiers swarmed the area. They disarmed Silas's remaining men. They surrounded the fallen Deputy Hale. Clara did not look at them. She dropped the gun. It fell into the dust with a dull thud. "Tyen," she whispered. He was standing over Silas, swaying slightly. His hand was pressed to his left side, just below the ribs. Dark blood was seeping between his fingers, staining the buckskin shirt black. "Tyen!" Clara ran to him. He turned toward her, his face gray, his lips pale, his knees buckled. She caught him as he fell, the weight of him dragging her down to the canyon floor. I'm all right," he wheezed, but the blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth said otherwise. "You are shot!" Clara cried, pressing her hands over his to staunch the flow. "Doctor, we need a doctor." A soldier with a medical bag was already running toward them. But to Clara, the world had narrowed down to the face of the man in her arms. Mrs. Delaney was there, pulling Nina into a hug. But Clara saw only Tyen. "You promised," she sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You promised you would not leave." Tyen looked up at her. His eyes were losing focus, but he fought to keep them on hers. He reached up with a bloody hand and touched her cheek. "The book," he rasped. "Did we get the book?" "Yes," Clara wept. "We got the book. We got him. It is over." A soldier kicked Silas's body over. A leather satchel had fallen from his coat. The soldier opened it. "Ledger inside, Lieutenant, and these bills of sale. And look at the horses." Mateo's voice drifted over. "Look at the shoes." Just as he said. Justice had arrived. It was messy. It was late, and it was bought with blood. But it was there. Tyen smiled. a faint, weak curving of his lips. "Good." His hand slipped from her cheek. His head lolled back against her arm. "No, no, no," Clara begged, rocking him. "Stay. Tyen, stay. Do not go back to the ghosts. Stay here." "Clara," he whispered. It was barely a sound. "Do not leave." "I am here," she said, her voice fierce and broken. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere. I choose to stay. Do you hear me? I choose you." The army surgeon knelt beside them. "Let me see him. Ma'am, move aside." "Save him," Clara ordered, grabbing the surgeon's sleeve with a grip that was bruised. "If he dies, I will burn this territory to the ground." The surgeon looked at her, a disheveled, dusty woman with wild hair and the eyes of a wolf mother, and nodded. "I will do my best." Clara sat back in the dust, her hands covered in Tyen's blood. She watched as they worked on him. She saw Nina watching her from Mrs. Delaney's arms. The wind picked up again, swirling the dust around them, but Clara did not feel the cold anymore. She felt the heat of the blood on her hands, the terrible, burning price of freedom. Silas was bound and thrown into the back of his own wagon. Hale was being attended to under guard. The ledger, the proof of so much death and misery, was in the lieutenant's hands, but Clara only watched the rise and fall of Tyen's chest. "Live," she commanded the universe. "Just live." The return to Red River Station was a blur of dust and pain. The victory at the canyon had tasted of ash almost immediately. Tyen had slumped forward in the saddle, his consciousness drifting like smoke in a gale, and it had taken Mateo and 2 soldiers to keep him from falling into the red dirt. They laid him in the back room of the station, on Mrs. Delaney's own bed. The quilt, usually reserved for guests of high standing, was soon stained with the dark, heavy blood of a Comanche warrior. The army surgeon, a man with tired eyes and hands that smelled of carbolic acid and tobacco, worked for an hour to remove the lead slug from Tyen's side. "He is strong as a bull," the doctor said, wiping his instruments on a rag. "But the fever is the real enemy now. If he makes it through the night, he might live to hang, or to ride. It is hard to say which one the territory prefers." Clara did not leave the bedside. She sat on a wooden stool, wringing out cool clothes to place on Tyen's forehead. His skin burned against her palm. In his delirium, he spoke in his own tongue, words that sounded like water rushing over stones, urgent, pleading, and unintelligible to her ears. Occasionally, he would grasp her wrist with a grip that left bruises, whispering names of the dead. "I am here," Clara would whisper back, smoothing the damp hair from his face. "I am here." Outside, the world was rearranging itself. The silence of the prairie had been replaced by the noise of an occupation. Colonel Mackenzie's column had set up a temporary bivouac near the creek. Tents rose like white mushrooms. Horses picketed in long lines chewed the sparse grass. The arrest of Silas Crow had sent a shockwave through the region, and by the second day, a crowd had gathered. It was not a court of law. There were no gavels, no bailiffs, and no jury of peers. It was a military inquiry, held on the porch of the way station under the harsh glare of the midday sun. "Miss Whitmore," a major called out. He sat behind Mrs. Delaney's dining table, which had been dragged outside to serve as a desk. He was a stern man with a mustache that looked like a bristle brush. "We require your testimony." Clara stood up. She had not slept in 30 hours. She wore the same blue dress she had arrived in, now stained with mud, grease, and the blood of the man she loved. She had tried to wash her face, but the exhaustion was etched deep into her skin. She walked out onto the porch. The yard was full. There were soldiers in blue, standing at ease. There were drovers and cattlemen, men who had known Silas, men who had bought his whiskey and perhaps believed his lies. And there were the townsfolk, the people who had shut their doors when she needed help. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. A white woman who rode with an Indian. A woman who had shot a businessman. "State your name and your business in this territory," the major said, his pen hovering over a ledger. "Clara Whitmore." she said. Her voice was hoarse, but it carried across the yard. I have no business. I was the business. A murmur ran through the crowd. Explain yourself, the major commanded. I came here from St. Louis because my father owed money, Clara said, looking directly at the faces in the crowd. She saw Deputy Hale, his arm in a sling, sitting under guard. She saw the faces of the men who had turned away. I was told I was coming to marry a rancher named Arthur Vance, but there is no Arthur Vance. There is only a bill of sale. She pointed to the document lying on the table, the one they had taken from Silas. $300, Clara said. That is the price of a woman in your territory. Less than a good horse. More than a rifle. Silas Crow is a criminal, the major said dismissively. We have established that. But we are here to discuss the Indian. Tyen. He is accused of raiding, of theft, of being off the reservation without a permit. He is the only reason any of you know the truth, Clara snapped. The anger flared in her chest. Hot and righteous. Silas Crow burned the wagons. Silas Crow shod the horses with bad iron to make tracks that looked like Comanche ponies. Silas Crow killed the peace so he could sell you the bullets to fight the war. That is a heavy accusation, a cattleman shouted from the back. Defending a redskin against a white man. I am defending the truth, Clara shouted back. And if you want proof, look at the book. Mrs. Delaney stepped forward. She carried the heavy leather ledger like a Bible. She slammed it down on the table in front of the major. Dust flew up from the impact. It is all there, Mrs. Delaney said, her voice hard as granite. Every crate of rifles, every bottle of whiskey, every girl he sold, and every bribe he paid. She turned her gaze to Deputy Hale. Including the $20 a month to the law to look the other way. The major opened the book. He ran his finger down the columns. The silence in the yard grew heavy. The evidence was not emotional. It was mathematical. Ink did not lie. November 4th, the major read aloud. Payment from Army Quartermaster for grain. Same date. Sale of 50 Springfield rifles to Comanchero Jose. Payment in gold. The crowd shifted. The mood changed from hostility to a sullen, angry realization. They had been played. They had been fighting a ghost war manufactured for profit. Tyen did not raid your herds, Clara said, her voice dropping to a quiet intensity. He was trying to stop the man who did. He saved my life. He saved this station. And he is lying in that bed, dying, because he had more honor than any man standing in this yard. She turned and walked back into the house. She did not wait to be dismissed. She had said her piece. The society that had judged her could now judge itself. Inside the dim room, Tyen was awake. He was propped up against the pillows, his face gaunt, his eyes dark pools of feverish clarity. He had heard her. The window was open. Clara sat beside him, taking his hand. It was rough, calloused, the hand of a warrior. You speak loud, Tyen whispered. His voice was like dry leaves. Someone had to, Clara said. Tyen looked at the ceiling. I thought the bridge was burned, he said softly. I thought there was the white world, and the red world, and a river of blood between them. I thought no one crossed. I crossed, Clara said. Yes. Tyen turned his head to look at her. You crossed. You stood before the chiefs of your people, and you claimed your own worth. And you claimed mine. You are not a savage, Tyen, Clara said fiercely. To them, I am, he said. Even with the book, even with the truth. Tomorrow, the soldiers will leave. Silas will hang, or he will go to prison. But I will still be an Indian, and you will be the woman who loved me. He squeezed her hand. A weak pressure. It is a heavy coat to wear. Clara, it does not keep out the cold. Clara felt the truth of his words settle in her stomach. The trial had cleared his name of the crimes, but it had not cleared the prejudice. Later that afternoon, the fever broke. Tyen slept a true sleep, his breathing deep and even. The station quieted down. The major and his men moved their command post back to the tents. Clara found herself standing in the kitchen. Her hands felt empty. She needed to do something. The rhythm of the station had to continue. She picked up the milk pail. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the yard. The air was cooling, losing the brutal heat of the day. Clara walked to the barn. The Jersey cow was there, waiting, patient and indifferent to the drama of men. Clara set the stool down. She sat. She leaned her head against the cow's warm flank. She closed her eyes and remembered the morning in the snow, the way Tyen's breath had felt on her neck, the way his hands had covered hers. "I will teach you everything." She took a breath. She reached out. She did not pull. She squeezed. A rolling, rhythmic motion. Swish. The milk hit the pail. A strong, steady stream. Swish, swish. She found the rhythm. It was a dance between her hands and the animal. It was life, simple and sustaining. A sound came from the barn door, a small, bright sound. Clara turned. Nina was standing there. The little girl was holding her rag doll, but for the first time in months, she was not hiding behind a post or a skirt. She was standing in the open, and she was laughing. It was a rusty sound, unused, but it was genuine. She pointed at the pail, then at Clara. "You did it," Nina said. Her voice was clear, surprising Clara, who had gotten used to the child's silence. Clara smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, I did it. Tyen said you would," Nina said, stepping into the barn. "He said you have good hands, strong hands." "Did he?" Clara asked, her heart aching. "He said you hold on tight," Nina said. She walked over and looked into the frothy white milk. "Are you going to stay?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the scent of hay. Clara looked at the child. She looked at the milk. She thought of Tyen in the bed, healing but marked. She thought of the Major's cold eyes. She thought of the whispers she had heard from the drovers. "She is ruined. No decent man will take her now. She lays with the Comanche. If she stayed, she would be a pariah. And worse, she would be a target. And Tyen, if he stayed near her, he would never be safe. The hatred would find a reason to strike him. A lost calf, a stolen horse. They would blame him again because he was near the woman who disrupted their order. Clara started, then stopped. She finished milking in silence. That night, while Tyen slept and Mrs. Delaney snored softly in her chair by the fire. Clara sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil. She wrote, "Tyen, the book is safe. Your name is clear, but the world has not changed. If I stay, they will hate you because of me. They will wait for a mistake. They will burn this station to get to us. I cannot be the fire that burns you down. I am going to Fort Worth. I will find work. I will be safe. You must go back to the high plains. Be free. Do not let them put you in a cage again. Thank you for teaching me how to stand. Clara." She folded the paper. Her hands were trembling. It was a lie, of course, not the danger that was real, but the implication that she could just walk away and be whole. She was leaving her heart in a sod house in the Panhandle. She placed the letter on the table, next to the ledger. She stood up to go pack her small satchel. A floorboard creaked. Clara turned. The room was empty, but the back door, the one leading to the yard, was ajar. The wind was whistling through the crack. "Nina," Clara whispered. She went to the door. She looked out. The moon was full, painting the prairie in silver and black. There, running toward the open scrub, was a small figure. Nina. She must have been listening. She must have seen the letter. To a child who had seen woman after woman arrive, stay for a few days, and then disappear into the wagons of men like Silas. A letter on the table meant only one thing: abandonment. "No!" Clara gasped. "Nina!" She ran back into the room. She grabbed her shawl. "Mrs. Delaney!" she shouted. "Wake up, Mrs." Delaney jerked awake. What is it?" "Nina," Clara said. "She ran. She thinks I am leaving her." From the back room, a noise. Tyen was standing in the doorway. He was pale as a ghost, clutching the door frame to stay upright. He had pulled his breeches on, but his chest was bare, wrapped in white bandages that were already spotting with fresh blood. "She ran," Tyen asked, his voice tight with pain. Go back to bed, Clara ordered. You will tear the stitches. She is the herd, Tyen said, gritting his teeth. He pushed himself off the door frame. He staggered, but he did not fall. A calf alone in the moonlight is meat for the coyote. You cannot ride, Clara cried. I do not need to ride, Tyen said, grabbing his coat. I need to track, and you will be my legs. They went out into the night. They did not take a horse. The noise would frighten her further. They walked. The wind was brutal again, a reminder that the land did not care about their dramas. It whipped Clara's hair across her face. Tyen leaned heavily on her shoulder, his breathing ragged. Every step was a battle for him. Here, Tyen pointed to the ground. Small print, running. One boot drags a little. They followed the track. It led away from the road, deep into the brush. It was the path of someone who did not want to be found, someone who wanted to disappear before they could be thrown away. Nina, Clara called out. Nina, come back! I am not going! The wind snatched her words and tore them apart. They walked for a mile. Tyen was sweating, his weight on Clara growing heavier. She stopped here, Tyen wheezed, pointing to a disturbed patch of sand. She sat, then she ran again, scared. Scared of what? The dark, Tyen said. The wolves. They crested a small rise. Below them, in a hollow protected by a cluster of prickly pear cactus, was a shadow that did not belong. It was Nina. She was curled into a ball, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face buried in her skirt. She was shaking so hard it looked like a seizure. Nina, Clara said softly. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, feral with panic. Go away, she screamed. You wrote the letter. You are going. Everyone goes. Clara moved forward, disregarding the thorns of the cactus that snagged her dress. I wrote it because I was afraid, Clara said, dropping to her knees in the dirt. Not because I wanted to leave, because I thought I was bad for you, bad for Tyen. You are a liar, Nina sobbed. My mama said she would stay. She died. The Lady Sarah said she would stay. Silas took her. You are just the same. Clara reached out. Nina tried to scramble away, backing into the cactus. No! Clara lunged and grabbed the child. She pulled her into her arms. Nina fought, kicking and hitting, her small fists striking Clara's chest. Clara held on. She squeezed, like the milking, a firm, unyielding pressure that promised safety, not captivity. I am not going, Clara said, speaking into the child's hair. I tore the letter up in my mind. I am here. Look at me. I am here. Nina's struggles began to slow. She collapsed against Clara, her sobs turning into high, keening wails of grief. Tyen stood over them. He was swaying, his hand pressed to his side, but he was smiling. It was a grimace of pain, but his eyes were warm. The calf is safe, he whispered. Clara looked up at him. Then she looked down at the weeping child in her arms. She realized she had been wrong. She wasn't a girl who had been sent to the wrong address. She wasn't a burden. She was the anchor. I do not know how to be a mother, Nina, Clara said, her voice trembling but loud enough to be heard over the wind. I do not know how to braid hair perfectly. I do not know how to bake pies that do not burn. I have never raised a child. She pulled back to look Nina in the face. She wiped the tears from the girl's cheeks with her thumb. But I will learn, Clara vowed. I will learn everything, just like I learned to milk the cow, just like I learned to shoot. I will stay, and I will learn. Nina looked at her, searching for the lie. She found none. She buried her face in Clara's neck and held on. Tyen groaned, his legs finally giving out. He sank to his knees beside them. Clara reached out one arm and pulled him in. The three of them sat there in the dirt, under the vast, indifferent stars of the Texas Panhandle, a woman who had been sold, a warrior who had been hunted, and a child who had been left behind. We go back, Tyen said, his voice weak. To the station. Yes, Clara said. We go home. She helped Tyen stand, Nina clinging to her waist. It was a slow, painful procession back to the house, but for the first time, the wind did not feel like it was hunting them. It felt like it was pushing them toward the only place they belonged. The dawn that followed the night of the rescue broke with a softness that felt alien to the Texas Panhandle. The wind, which had spent days howling like a banshee, had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a silence that was vast and golden. Inside the way station, the air smelled of sage, wood smoke, and the rich, savory aroma of beef stew simmering in a cast-iron pot. It was a domestic smell, a scent of peace that seemed to push back the memories of gunpowder and blood. Clara Whitmore stood by the stove, stirring the pot with a long wooden spoon. She moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her body ached. Her feet were bruised from the walk through the cactus, and her hands were raw, but she felt light. At the rough-hewn table, Tyen sat. He was dressed in a clean shirt Mrs. Delaney had found in an old trunk, likely belonging to her late husband. It was a little loose in the shoulders, but it covered the bandages on his side. He was holding a cup of coffee. His hand, usually as steady as a rock, trembled slightly, the aftershocks of fever and blood loss. Clara watched him. He caught her looking and smiled. It was not the guarded, cynical smirk of the scout she had met days ago. It was a genuine loosening of the face, a smile that reached his dark eyes. "You are staring," Tyen said. His voice was raspy, but the strength was returning to it. "I am checking to see if you are real," Clara replied, bringing a bowl of stew to the table, "or if I am going to wake up in the snow again." "The snow is gone," Tyen said. He took the spoon she offered. "And the wolves have been chased away." Nina was sitting on the floor near the hearth, playing with a set of wooden blocks Mrs. Delaney had unearthed. She was building a tower, stacking them high with intense concentration. When the tower wobbled, she did not panic. She simply steadied it with a small hand. She looked up at Clara and beamed a smile minus one front tooth. Full of trust, Mrs. Delaney walked in from the yard, dusting her hands on her apron. She looked 10 years younger. The weight of the secret ledger was gone from her neck. "They are moving out," Mrs. Delaney announced. "The Army Patrol, taking Silas and his men to Fort Griffin for trial." Clara went to the window. She saw the column of blue-coated soldiers forming up. In the center was a wagon with bars. Silas Crow sat inside, his expensive suit ruined, his hand wrapped in a thick bandage where Clara's bullet had shattered his wrist. He looked small now, defeated. "And Hale?" Clara asked. "Stripped of his badge," Mrs. Delaney said with grim satisfaction. "The major said he is lucky they did not hang him for treason. He will spend a long time breaking rocks at the military prison." "It feels simple," Clara said. "After all the fear, just men in wagons. Justice is not a lightning bolt from heaven." "Clara," Mrs. Delaney said, joining her at the window, "it is just men cleaning up a mess. It is never perfect, but it is enough to let us sleep tonight without a gun under the pillow." Clara watched until the dust from the column settled. The town, the collection of shacks and hopeful fences remained. The people there had watched the arrest in silence. They did not cheer for Clara. They did not apologize for shunning her. But when the grocer had come by earlier to drop off a sack of flour, he had tipped his hat to Tyen. It was a small thing, a microscopic shift in the bedrock of prejudice, but it was there. Later that morning, Clara and Tyen walked out to the corral. The sun was warm on their faces. Tyen walked slowly, leaning on a fence post every few yards, but he refused Clara's arm. He needed to find his own legs again. They stopped by the creek, where the water was beginning to run clear again after the storm. "Where do we go?" Clara asked. It was the question that had been haunting her. Tyen looked north, toward the open plains where the Comanche band still roamed, fighting a war they could not win. Then he looked south, toward the settlements where the fences were multiplying like weeds. "I cannot go back to the bands," Tyen said quietly. "I have walked too far down the white man's road. They will not trust me, and I cannot live in a town where I am looked at like a wolf in a dog's kennel." "So we have no place," Clara said. "We make a place." Tyen said. He pointed to a rise in the land, just a mile from the station, where a grove of cottonwood trees offered shade and the creek bent in a gentle curve. "There, it is on the edge, close enough to the station for trade, close enough to the trail to see who comes, but far enough to be our own." "On the edge," Clara repeated. "Between the wild and the sown." "It is a hard place to live," Tyen warned. "You will not have tea parties. You will have dust and work." Clara laughed. "I think I am done with tea parties. I find I prefer a good rifle and a milk cow." Tyen reached into his pocket. He pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a small, intricately carved piece of bone, a bear's tooth, darkened with age and ochre. It was a warrior's charm, a symbol of a life dedicated to the raid, to the strike, to the perpetual war. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a decisive movement, he untied the knot. He did not throw it away. He simply placed it in his pocket, deep down. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. "I'm putting down the spear." Tyen said, "A warrior fights to protect the people, but a husband builds so there is something to protect. I am choosing the building." It was a proposal, more profound than any bent knee or diamond ring. He was shedding his identity as a weapon to become a man. Clara felt a lump in her throat. She reached out and took his hand. "And I have a choice to make too." She led him back to the station. On the porch, she had set up a small table with a new ledger not hidden under a stone, but open to the air. Beside it was a sign she had painted that morning using leftover whitewash: "Safe Male Aid." "What is this?" Tyen asked. "Mrs. Delaney told me there are other girls," Clara said. "Girls who write letters home that never arrive. Girls who are sent here like packages. I cannot stop the stagecoaches, Tyen, but I can make sure that when they step off, they know they have a choice." "You will make enemies," Tyen said. "I have a very good sharpshooter to watch my back," Clara teased. "He is out of practice." Tyen smiled. "But he will learn." The sun began to dip low, painting the sky in the extravagant purples and oranges that only the west could produce. It was milking time. Clara went to the barn. The air inside was thick and sweet with the smell of dry grass and animal warmth. The Jersey cow was waiting. Clara sat on the stool. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear. She placed the bucket. She rested her forehead against the cow's flank for a moment, listening to the steady heartbeat of the animal. She reached out. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. The milk hit the pail with a strong, rhythmic drumming. It was the sound of sustenance. It was the sound of a life that was working. She heard the barn door slide shut. The light dimmed, leaving only the golden dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunset. Tyen walked toward her. He moved silently, the limp almost gone. He stood behind her, watching her hands work. "You have the rhythm," he said softly. "I had a patient teacher," Clara said, not stopping. Tyen knelt in the straw beside her. He was close enough that she could smell the soap he had used, the scent of the cottonwood trees, and the underlying musk of his skin. He reached out and placed his hand over hers, just for a second, stopping the motion. Clara turned to look at him. His eyes were dark and bottomless. There was no need for grand speeches. The gunshots in the canyon, the blood on the rocks, the desperate run through the night to find Nina, those were the vows. They had been written in survival. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. "Clara," he breathed. "Tyen," she whispered back. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He simply breathed with her. It was an intimacy far more potent than the touch of lips. It was the sharing of the same air, the acknowledgement that they were two broken halves that had fused into something whole. It was sexy in the way that rain on parched earth is sexy, elemental, necessary, and life-giving. "I will not teach you everything," Tyen whispered, a ghost of a laugh in his voice. "You have taught me." "What did I teach you?" Clara asked, closing her eyes, drinking in his presence. "That the bridge can be rebuilt," he said. "They stayed like that for a long time. while the cow chewed its cud and the barn swallows darted in the rafters. It was a peace that felt earned. It felt heavy and real, like gold dust in the palm. When they finally emerged from the barn, the evening star was bright in the western sky. Nina was sitting on the porch rail, swinging her legs. She was wearing a dress that Mrs. Delaney had cut down for her. It was clean, and her hair was braided crookedly by Clara's inexperienced hands, but braided nonetheless. When she saw them, she jumped down. She did not run to hide. She ran to them. She grabbed Clara's hand on one side and Tyann's hand on the other. "Supper is ready," Nina announced. "Mrs. Delaney made biscuits. She says if we are late, she will feed them to the hogs." Clara looked down at the child. She looked at Tyann, whose hand was warm and solid in hers. She looked at the station, battered by the wind but standing firm. She remembered the girl who had stepped off the stagecoach with a trunk full of useless dresses and a head full of romantic delusions. That girl was gone. She had died in the snow, or perhaps she had been reborn in the fire of the canyon. Clara squeezed Tyann's hand. He squeezed back. A signal. A language of two. "We are coming," Clara said. She paused for a second, looking back at the darkening prairie. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a song. "I came here as a commodity," Clara thought, taking a deep breath of the cool, wild air. "I came here to be sold, but I stay as a free woman." She turned her back on the dark and walked into the light of the house, where the family she had chosen was waiting. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the snowy plains of St. Louis to the red rocks of the Texas Panhandle, and I hope Clara and Tyann's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a busy city, or somewhere out on the edge like our heroes? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button and give the video a hype so that more people can hear about the legend of the virgin who learned to milk a cow and the warrior who learned to love. Thank you for your support, and keep riding free.